Hi guys, Owen here. Just a quick announcement before beginning the episode. As of recording, I am currently on holidays in Mexico, and because of this, the episode will be shorter than usual. Also, I am recording in an apartment in the center of Mexico City, so the audio might not be as good as what you are normally used to. However, I hope that in talking about Mexico's most famous celebration, where it actually takes place, you will appreciate this episode more and might even be willing to take part in its festivities, whether you are in Mexico or elsewhere. So, with that said, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to History House. I'm your host, Owen Delaney. Let's begin. Today, I am recording this episode from Condesa in Mexico City in the lead up to Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, an event that has become a staple of the popular perception of Mexico and has been depicted again and again in works such as Pixar's Coco and, surprisingly, James Bond, Spectre to be exact. This episode will trace the history of this event and how it was shaped, changed, and became what it is today, along with its traditions. I will also be talking about the Mexican printmaker José Guadalupe Posada and how his use of skeletons, calaveras, has become an intrinsic part of Mexican culture. There is a lot to talk about, so without any further ado, let's go, or as they say in Mexico, vámonos. Day of the Dead falls on All Saints and All Souls Day, November 1st and 2nd. Strictly speaking, however, the term Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, refers to All Souls Day, November 2nd, but colloquially, it denotes the entire period from October 31st through November the 2nd. The Day of the Dead is fundamentally days of ritual focusing on honouring and symbolically nourishing deceased ancestors, with the 1st of November, All Saints' Day, being devoted to honouring angelitos, little angels, or children who died in sexual innocence, who are believed to pass directly to heaven. November the 2nd, All Souls' Day, is dedicated to remembering the adult deceased. General customs include cleaning, decorating, and maintaining vigil over relatives' graves. Historically, cemetery vigils were sometimes threatened or banned by civil authorities in colonial times due to the celebration's raucous or political nature. Home altars are also a common tradition, and both these and graves would often be elaborately decorated and adorned with candles, flowers, and food offerings, ofrendas. The tradition of offering food at grave sites and altars derives from Spanish tradition, but the indigenous tradition of edible anthropomorphic figures such as Aztec, or Mexica more correctly, ritual images made of tzoali, amaranth seed dough, contributed to the acceptance of such food in the colonial era. One ubiquitous food item is pan de muerto, dead bread, a soft, spongy bread often fashioned in human representations, which I tried with a very good friend of mine in Mexico City. Another set of traditional food are sugar skulls, calaveras, and chocolate products, which are widely sold in shops and on street corners. These candies are colourfully decorated and often have the name of a person inscribed in sugar icing on the forehead. People buy and present these candy skulls as gifts to friends or relatives. Crucially, the names inscribed on the skulls are invariably those of living persons, rather than the deceased. These offerings, ofrendas, would often be accompanied by the marigold flower, cempasúchil, as it was called by the Mexica. Traditionally, its bright orange and yellow colours are thought to create a pathway of light, guiding souls on their journey to the afterlife. Sometimes marigolds are accompanied by other flowers like chrysanthemums for remembrance, cockscomb representing the blood of Christ, baby's breath for purity, and gladiolus for remembrance. While these traditions are considered common across Mexico, naturally different states and areas have unique festivities associated with Day of the Dead. In Sinsunzan, in Michoacan state, to the west of Mexico City for example, the traditional vigil is now a grand event, sometimes featuring floodlights and television cameras in order to encourage tourism. In Oaxaca, however, which I visited a few days ago, parades, comparsas or muertedas, would take place, and a more elaborate form of the vigil called alumbradas, veladas, where families spend the night around their loved ones' graves, lighting candles, praying, singing, and sharing food and mezcal, would take place. As this is a history podcast, you might be wondering how such traditions evolved for something that is both similar and yet wholly different from how All Saints and All Souls Day is celebrated in Spain and throughout Europe. Many people associate the traditions of Day of the Dead with Mesoamerican traditions that have been preserved and maintained throughout the Spanish conquest, colonial period, and the centuries following Mexican independence from 1821. This is partly true. I mentioned the Tzoali, which dates from this time and continues today. Further, the art of ancient Mesoamerica featured many symbols of death, including the Tzompantli skull rack, where the skulls of sacrificial victims were publicly exhibited. However, these images were serious and lacked the playfulness and humour that images of skeletons are commonly associated with in contemporary Mexico. As Stanley Brandes notes in his work, Skulls to the Living, Bread to the Dead, Celebrations of Death in Mexico and Beyond, the Spanish conquest marks the beginning of the common traditions and customs we would associate with Dia de los Muertos. As any student of history knows, the period of the Spanish conquest, which began in 1519, was a time of death, pain, and immense suffering for the peoples of Mesoamerica. Alongside the violence that came with the conquest itself, European diseases, of which the indigenous people of the Americas lacked immunity, ravaged the population, with historians stating a staggering 80 to 95% decrease in the native population. Stanley Brandes notes that the ever-present nature of death during this period played a contribution in the celebration of death during the colonial period. He also notes that the food associated with the festivities is Spanish rather than indigenous in origin, stating, quote, "The principal types and uses of food on this holiday definitely derive from Europe. After all, there is no tortilla de muertos, but rather pan de muertos, just one highly significant detail. Nor did cane sugar exist in the Americas prior to the Spanish conquest. The existence of special breads and sugar-based sweets, the custom of placing these and other substances on grave sites and altars, and the practice of begging and other distributive mechanisms all derive from Spain." End quote. At the same time, he also notes that the ofrenda is also Spanish in origin. In Zamora, in Spain, there is a ritual practice of offering bread at cemeteries and churches in honour of the dead, while in medieval Mallorca there is evidence of a custom of placing bread on tombs during All Souls Day. As the 16th century became the 17th and later the 18th century, the traditions of Day of the Dead began to take shape, and its importance lay not just in remembering the deceased, but rather as a threat to the Spanish authorities. In October 1767, the Royal Criminal Chamber, Real Sala de Crimen, banned public attendance at cemeteries, as well as the sale of alcoholic beverages after 9 at night, linking death and its celebration thereof to civil disorder. And yet, these traditions continued. In 1821, Mexico became independent of Spain, but the following century would be tumultuous, to say the least, for this new state. Invasions, revolutions, wars, all these shaped the history of Mexico into the 20th century, and death, just like in the period of the conquest, was also a common facet of life. It was during this time that the image of death, a symbol of fear and dread, would become an object of satire and fun, with the artist José Guadalupe Posada, 1852 to 1913, playing a key role in this evolution. Following independence, the practice of literary satire would begin, and through printing, this would flourish. Mexico's first illustrated newspaper was called El Calavera, 1847, and specialized in satirizing political figures. Although it would be eventually suppressed, these satires, or calaveras, would continue to expand, with Posada playing a key role in this. Born in 1852, he would receive training in drawing and was an apprentice of José Trinidad Pedrosa, a printer and lithographer. In 1871, he was drawing cartoons for the periodical El Jicote, the Hornet, in León, Guanajuato, before moving to Mexico City in 1888, and forming a partnership with Antonio Venegas Arroyo, a publisher of broadsides and chapbooks throughout Mexico. He would use skeletons as the main vehicle of his satire, depicting them in a wide range of activities including dancing, drinking, playing instruments, and more, with his famous image of satire being the Catrina. This was an aristocratic lady, characterised as a fleshless skull topped with a fancy wide-brimmed hat decorated with flowers, a satire of bourgeoisie costume. Posada's choice of skeletons as objects of satire was deliberate. The Day of the Dead provided a, quote, humorous license, as stated by Stanley Brandes, for people to express dissatisfaction with political leaders at a time when criticism was often censored and suppressed. It should be noted that while Posada's prints were distributed across the country, he would die in poverty in 1913 and be buried in a pauper's grave. As such, the influence of his skeletons, calaveras, didn't directly stem from him, but rather people who were influenced by his works. Following his death, these works would largely be forgotten, only to be, quote, rediscovered in the 1920s by Jean Charlot, a French-American painter and illustrator, with other more famous artists, such as Diego Rivera, not only being inspired by him, but directly incorporating Posada and the Catrina figure in his work. A Sunday afternoon in Alameda Park. As such, Posada and his calaveras would be repurposed from their original intention as images of social and political satire to symbols not just of Day of the Dead, but also of Mexican identity, along with the commercialization that entails this event, both in Mexico and around the world. To finish, I would like to talk about something that happened a few days ago. The day before yesterday, I met up with a former English student of mine in Oaxaca, who kindly showed me around some ofrendas and works of art depicting calaveras. In spite of such a macabre and dark subject, I was struck by the beauty of these artworks and the ultimate intention of remembering the presence of the dead during these days and the happy memories of them, rather than the fact that they have left this world. At that moment, it reminded me of a unique tradition in Ireland, the wake, in which people would gather around the open coffin of a deceased person, share stories, have a laugh, and maybe have a few too many pints. Indeed, I thought about the wake of my own grandfather, who passed away in 2011, and how there was not a table big enough to put the coffin on, and as such, it was placed on a pool table, with children playing Mario Kart underneath it, on Nintendo DS's, which were popular at the time. This almost surreal, funny scene, of which my grandfather would have appreciated, has a lot of similarities to the humorous nature of the calaveras that are to be found everywhere in Mexico during late October, early November. And yet there is a warmth with these two traditions, in that death is not an object of fear, but rather an inevitability for everyone, that is embraced, making it less scary and more playful. Us Irish, and indeed Mexicans, like to make jokes at our misfortune, and in doing so, some of the pain that we face is taken away, and life, or indeed the fate of death, becomes more bearable again. And indeed, death, as dreaded as it is, can sometimes be peaceful, as my grandfather appeared in spite of the scene around him. As the writer Isaac Asimov said, life is pleasant, death is peaceful, it's the transition that's troublesome. So, during this time when we remember the dead, let's remember our loved ones, not because they are gone, but rather through our happy memories of them, and perhaps some funny ones too. As Groucho Marx once said, either he's dead or my watch has stopped. Feliz Dia de los Muertos. Happy Day of the Dead to you, my listeners. That's all for today. The next episode, which will be released at the end of November, will also be about a rather macabre subject. The most powerful Dutch politician of the 17th century, Johan de Witt, and his rather gruesome end in 1672, a time when Rembrandt painted, tulips were in full swing, and spices flowed into Amsterdam, a period now known as the Dutch Golden Age. And until next time, keep her lit.